Hi, hello everybody. Hello world. We live from Johns Hopkins University Applied Physics Lab, part of the fourth seminar ACM Baltimore chapter. And my name is Ashutosh Dutta. I'm chapter chair for ACM Baltimore chapter, which formed just very recently. This is the fourth seminar we're doing, and thank you for joining on Zoom. We have also, this is a hybrid seminar, so we have people in the room as well. And I'll be joined today with my colleagues, Jeff Chavez, Bola Akinpelu, and Ryan Pepito, who have helped in the past as well. So I'm the chair. We formed about a year back. We have done already 3 seminars. This is the 4th one. All of the seminars are in the YouTube, so please take a look at that. Jeff Chavez, my colleague, he's in here today, so he'll be also part of this program later on. He'll join later on. Wale Akinpelu, he's our treasurer. He'll be as well joining later on. I'd like to acknowledge other folks who are in the executive committee of ACM Baltimore chapter. So Ashutosh, that's myself, Jeff, Random Goin, our webmaster, Tamim Shakur, secretary, Ken Smith from Johns Hopkins University, and Wale is right here. We also have new colleagues joining in. So Ryan, I'd like to say hello to you over here. He's also part of the ACM Baltimore chapter. Anybody who'd like to join and do any future seminars, please do join. We have done, in addition to 3 seminars, we also have done Next Summit in collaboration with IEEE Future Network. So, and that's also in the YouTube, by the way. So please take a look at those. This is the agenda today. We are actually a little bit 10 minutes late, so we are going to start. We have 2 invited talks today, and they will be introduced very soon. So we're going to have the first talk. I'll give a little bit introduction about ACM, then the first talk, and then we'll have a little break, then the second talk, right? So the first one is will be given by Gabriella Waters, founder of Progressive Heuristics. And she'll be talking about smart cities, IoT deployment, equity, and fairness. And then another invited talk, building the metaverse to solve our most interactive urban challenges. This is, I was in Mobile World Congress in Las Vegas, and this has been a hot topic, by the way, and even metaverse, how it's going to affect the digital divide, all those stuff, right? So look forward to these 2 talks. Then we'll have some future plans and vote of thanks. So this is like to acknowledge the IEEE Baltimore Section Computer Society chapter, Don Harris. They put it up in the vTools. They have been collaborating with ACM in the Next Summit and the last one as well. I'm hoping there'll be more collaboration going forward with IEEE Baltimore section. I also like to acknowledge IEEE Princeton Central Jersey section. They have ACM chapter. They also have sent it out. Anybody like to put it in their vTools, please let me know. Next time we can do that. We have been doing average once in 2 months, right, Jeff, Wale? All right, so this is our esteemed speaker for today, and you will get the introduction later on. Just wanted to introduce them very briefly in the beginning. Just to give you a little bit of history of what has happened. Obviously, this is the 75th year of ACM, and we had, the first one took place 24th of February, and we had President of ACM, Dr. Samel, and Director of APL, Professor Len Kleinrock, one of the fathers of the internet, Dr. April Erickson from NASA, and Professor Henning Schuljuni from Columbia. So they had a range of topics, including NASA, what is happening in the history of internet, and digital divide. So they are all available in the website and the ACM YouTube channel. And the second one took place April 20th, Professor Stephen Velobin from Columbia, and Professor Anupam Joshi from University of Maryland, Baltimore County. And the talk was mostly focused on security. And the third one we had on August 11th, Professor Raj Jain. He talked about AI. This was mostly focused on AI and application of AI. And if you see Al Greenberg and Melin Jabi, they spoke about a new language, right? Go language. So it was mostly focused on AI, how we can use AI, cybersecurity associated with AI. So those are the history. Then we had the Next Summit that took place actually in this room. But these are the seminar I was focusing, and these are some of the pictures as you can see. Henning, Dr. Samuel, and Jeb. We have NASA scientists speaking over there. Then this is the one, again from February 24th, Professor Len Kleinrock from UCLA. In the background, you can see that IMP node that was used to send the first packet in 1969 from UCLA to SRI, right? That was a very, very interesting talk. And then you can see most of the time, a lot of virtual attendees are gradually opening up, but we have been doing hybrid right from the get-go. So this is the third one, August 11, which we had actually 3 speakers and 2 topics. So things are going, I'm hoping you're going to, if you miss it for some reason or you want to watch it, they're all in the YouTube channels. If you just Google ACM YouTube, Baltimore chapter, you'll get that. So I'd like to thank ACM, local section activities folks like Sunita and other folks who have been helping us spreading the word. So with that, I'd like to invite Jeff Chavis right now to come and introduce our next speaker.
Thank you, Ashutosh. Thank you all for joining. Right, so our next talk is going to be by Gabriella Waters. She's the founder of Progressive Heuristics, and her talk is going to be on smart cities, IoT deployment, equity and fairness. So a little bit about Gabriella Waters. Gabriella Waters is a data scientist, a cognitive researcher, and the founder of Progressive Heuristics, which is a tech company focused on innovations that make artificial intelligence and neural network technologies more accessible and equitable across all populations. She is also the director of public relations for the Morgan State University Center for Equitable AI and Machine Learning Systems. In her research, Gabriella is interested in studying the intersection between human neurobiology and learning and the intelligent systems that make use of the foundations for improved human-computer synergy. She develops technology innovations with an emphasis on support for neurodiverse populations, as well as the creation of more robust systems that function in the absence of human interaction. We are very pleased and proud to be able to present Gabriella Waters.
All right, thank you so much. I am very happy to start this presentation, and it's a topic that's near and dear to all of us, whether we realize it or not. Smart cities and their technology are very much entrenched in our daily lives in ways that we may not be noticing out of the gate. So I want to start with a little bit of an introduction on Seamless, which is the Center for Equitable AI and Machine Learning Systems. It's there to facilitate research that looks at the development of standards, identification of new methods, and advancement of innovative technologies that benefit everyone on the planet. So we share that kind of passion to affect change across the globe. Seamless serves as an interdisciplinary nexus for thought leadership in the application of fair and unbiased technology and its applications. The center will remain rooted in scholarly stewardship, cultivating the next generation of students at all levels, as well as lifelong learners across industries and areas of study. So we're not just limited to computer scientists. AI and machine learning technology is available for artists, musicians, and every other kind of walk of life. Our mission at Seamless is to focus on a few areas. We conduct research on improving transparency and articulating purpose in AI models. A lot of times AI doesn't have explainability right on the surface. And in order to make it a more trustworthy technology, the center is focused on making sure we have open internals and good explanations for how the technology is being used, developed, and deployed. We also look at how to include fairness as an optimization objective. That needs to be a target. It can't be sort of a lofty goal. It has to be something that's measurable and included. We look at how to develop new tools and techniques for detecting bias and reducing the disparate impact caused by that bias. So if you don't have equity in mind as part of your development, you may have bias as part of your outcome. We also look at how to develop adversarial tools to stress test models. So we're not just going to talk about these things in theory. We want to put them through their paces and make sure they do what they say and that they live up to expectations. So we have a few goals at Seamless that you can see here. But one of the main things is that Seamless is going to be that resource for developers and the public by promoting the development of models that are open for analysis and that are linked with visual analytics so that everyone is more knowledgeable about the capabilities, the limits, and the biases that these models may possess. Seamless also analyzes new innovations to determine ways in which they could become problematic or damaged due to algorithmic bias, either actual or perceived. So you can kind of see our goals there on the screen. And one of the things that sets Seamless apart is that we are really interested in those open internals that I mentioned. So all of the research and the work that we do is going to be open for others to see so that they can apply those techniques as applicable to their use cases. So we're not just working in a vacuum. We are asking for that kind of explainability, and we're also willing to demonstrate it. We have several interdisciplinary research thrusts, and I think that word interdisciplinary is very important to focus on because we are not existing in just a vacuum. As I mentioned earlier, artificial technology crosses into every area at this point in its existence. And so it's important that we bring lots of different kinds of thought to the table. In that vein, Seamless seeks to answer simple but impactful questions with its research, such as, could an AI model cause harm, or could it perpetuate existing social hierarchies that prevent a fair playing field? Furthermore, the center endeavors to facilitate the development of formal standards for data preparation, model training, and deployment to promote equitable AI. This is all accomplished in part through the formalization of testing protocols for new AI innovations that promote the detection and mitigation of algorithmic bias. So the center is seeking to create that set of standards, that set of best practices that AI can measure itself against to make sure that it's operating equitably and that it's being deployed fairly. And so you're seeing sort of some of the areas that we promote research in. We're not limited to these areas, but these are just a starting point. The center opened on July 1st officially, and so we've got a ways to grow. And this gives us a little bit of a framework as we start out on how we're going to conduct that research and what areas we start out with. So if you were interested in partnering with Seamless in any way, this gives you a place to start. But as long as your projects fit within those first set of goals, you're good to go. So I've introduced the center. I'm not going to spend my entire time on the center, but I feel like it's important to highlight what the center does to give us a little bit of context for why we're also interested in the technology of smart cities. So the Internet of Things and its ever-increasing reach has allowed for the creation of algorithms that can better understand and optimize city services and infrastructure. So if you're not super familiar with smart cities, one of the things you can think about in terms of the technology and how it's deployed, things like traffic and congestion are measured in smart cities and how we can alleviate some of the burden of certain roads and the infrastructure involved in that. Smart cities IoT deployment, and for those who are not technically savvy, it's the Internet of Things, allows us to see in real time what's happening at the street level and beyond. In IoT, location absolutely matters. And we start with GIS technology. GIS technology stands for Geographical Information System. So when you think about the pin on your map, when you go somewhere from your GPS, that's an example of GIS technology. That technology enables us to apply location practices to any environment, including cities, Beyond geotagging, GIS can allow for visualization of different kinds of data on one map, like buildings, vegetation, and streets. This integration of data provides insight on the relationships and patterns that can be visualized. So the way we use the data that we get from the GIS can be visualized on one map, and we can see, using the data and modeling it, exactly what's going on from the street level to how many trees are there, how many cars are there, how many buildings, and make sure that when we're planning appropriately. So the GIS is important, but these next three concepts as part of that are what drive the entire system. The system of record enables government agencies and departments to manage the record, resources, and assets across a city. So think about sanitation, water, land, planning, records. All of that is contained under the system of record. The system of engagement allows location-aware apps and maps to be available across devices with the sharing of knowledge in mind. So, you know, if you're on your smartphone and you ask for the nearest market, it's going to show you the nearest market, but it's going to make assumptions on what else you might want that's nearby. System of engagement is behind that. So those other options, those things are part of that system of engagement. System of insight, identification of patterns for insights on city systems like congestion, spending, people movements, crime, all of those kinds of things. So the system of insight lets us know how people are moving throughout that city in that area and what they're doing. Are they spending more time in the shops? Are they spending more time congregating? What are people doing? That's what your system of insight provides in terms of data that we can look at. So which locations are given priority? That's a question that we look at when we look at the data and how we answer that. Is the data that's collected in the planning process being interpreted based on need, marketability, or other factors? What metrics are important when considering where to allocate dollars? Do cities overinvest in some neighborhoods while neglecting others? We have technology to make decisions that are supported by meaningful data. The questions we just asked are important litmus tests to ensure that we are doing our due diligence for meaningful outcomes for all residents and areas, or if we are creating continuous loops of serving or even over-serving some areas while underserving others. So we probably can think of some examples of residences and areas that are continuously overfunded, and they are continuously inundated with new technology and new improvements, while other areas aren't at all. And while it doesn't seem like it's an issue, what happens is that continuous loop means that there are sections of the city that are left behind, and that creates pockets of influence, and that influence can be in a positive or a negative way. So how do we promote that fairness in access? From a purely data-driven perspective, multiple data sets are required to visualize and understand where inequities are present so they can be addressed fairly. Cities across the country saw the significant disparities in equity during the pandemic and resulting quarantine. As smart city technology evolves, the reduction and eventual elimination of disenfranchisement in certain areas has to be addressed. We must use the right data to generate valid, actionable needs assessments to achieve goals with strategic benchmarks. So as data scientists, a lot of us have ideas on what that means in terms of the right kinds of data. But what kind of benchmarks can we apply to that data? So we can look at reduction in traffic congestion. We can look at improved land use and fewer vacant buildings and abandoned lots. We can look at green spaces in more neighborhoods and not just in some. So what are some ways that we can promote equity in smart cities? Inclusive data-driven innovation and analytics can improve the well-being, resiliency, and health of cities. Cities can leverage partnerships with universities and other organizations to develop high-impact, responsible data-driven analytics and research projects to address complex challenges and opportunities on behalf of community stakeholders and local governments. But that sounds good, and it sounds like someone else's job. Those of us who are the keepers or disseminators of the data used to make those decisions are also obligated to present it without bias and with equitable analytics in mind. So that means you can't sugarcoat anything, you can't continuously prop up certain data points and suppress others. You have to just present the data for what it is so people can make informed decisions and choices. So we started out talking about seamless, and we're going to bring it back into seamless here. The center's focus on equitable development, deployment, and use of technology is the driving force behind its research projects. So here are two examples of research happening right now at Seamless. And the first is building health equity through artificial intelligence and machine learning. Healthcare continues to be an area of great focus for improving equity. Cities are devoting more resources to pinpointing the sources of the challenge to ensure better health outcomes for all residents, regardless of their neighborhoods. As AI is further adopted for use in diagnoses and other systems, the need for unbiased, equitable, trustworthy intelligence systems grows. Our research in this area has direct impacts on how smart cities can evolve and update the implementation of their technology moving forward. So if you know there's health equity issues with artificial intelligence and you're planning a new medical center, wouldn't it be nice to bring these two sets of data to the same table and make sure that we're having the same conversation about the same needs? The second piece of research is excellence in research building an equitable and sustainable logistics system in rural areas with drones. So the moment we say drones, everyone thinks the cool factor of drones, but what do drones offer us? They offer us reach. They offer us the ability to be nimble and responsive. So while research in building equitable and sustainable logistics systems using drones focuses on rural areas in this particular example, the implications for smart cities is clear. As we saw a few slides back, smart cities make use of technology to tackle logistics challenges and which problems are addressed and how often come down to equitable decision-making processes. Our research in this area adds to the discourse on how these logistics systems are deployed and provides innovative solutions for challenges. These outcomes will provide a point of reference for smart city logistics and applications. So one of the coolest uses of drones in recent times was actually in a hospital in Africa. And there was a hospital in a very rural area and they needed blood. And it was over an hour's drive. They sent the blood on a drone and it got there in 15 minutes. When we think about smart cities, we think about technology like drones. Where are they? Who's using them? How can we monopolize on this concept to serve others? It takes a bit of creative thought in how we can apply the technology and the information that we have. And the Internet of Things is just one way, one piece of the puzzle on understanding and mapping out what's available and to whom, and how we can use that to serve more of our residents. So I'm trying my best to be as brief as possible. So I'm going to stop there and thank you for your time. And thank you to Dr. Dutta and Dr. Chavis for the opportunity to offer some perspectives on smart cities and IoT technology. And thank you to APL for hosting us. So any questions or comments, feel free.
Yes, so there's a question online from, let's see.
Don Harris. Don Harris.
Yeah,
Don Harris.
yes, Don Harris. His question is, would you comment more about the underserved neighborhoods where residents are fearful of surveillance? For example, immigrants are concerned about ICE monitoring.
Sure. So I think that's a good example of how the technology can be applied in ways that are not as equitable in some resident areas versus others. So there are neighborhoods where you can ride through and you won't see these kinds of surveillance technologies in place. And there are some neighborhoods where you ride through and you see it everywhere. So we need to ask ourselves some tough questions about what kind of environment we want to create psychologically for our residents as well as physically. So is the technology being used to enhance or make people feel safer, or is it being used more as an intimidation factor? We have a voice in how that is developed and deployed. So in moving forward, we can use that technology and the data to say, hey, all of this surveillance has not created any reductions in the crime that you purported, or it hasn't improved any outcomes that you purported. So maybe this isn't the best use of the technology. Let's invest in. So we use these data metrics as a point of conversation. And if we use the data fairly and put those points together, we can make sure that we are applying the technology in a more equitable way.
Thank you. Second question from Frederica Darima. She asked, what modeling do you use or plan to use in the analysis of the data? After all, we say data analytics, but what we really need is systems analytics.
So that's a good question. And I think it's going to always depend. So you need to know what you want the outcome to be. Is it going to be something like a linear regression? Is it going to be something like a logistical one? What's going to give you the best picture of what you're interpreting when you look at this data along certain lines? So yeah, we can use data analysis. We can use systems analyses as well. But answering the question of what you're trying to see is going to help you decide what you need to model and how. Hi, Dan.
How do you deal with the non-technical aspects of smart cities and smart cities? I mean, for example, one of the things that may be really valuable in the city is pedestrian areas. How do you measure if they're being applied in an equitable way?
So the good thing about the Internet of Things and GIS systems is that even those who are kind of averse to technology are still walking around with portable GPS systems in their pockets. So we can tell where they are, how they're moving, what they're doing, and we can make decisions on the best services with that in mind. We can also make some really bad decisions on that as well, based on what we hope to see as patterns. So sometimes it's better to work with the actual patterns that you are observing now versus what you hope will be the uptake in utilization. So I think that as we continue to move forward, there's not going to be a person really left who doesn't walk around with some kind of geotagging device that gives us insight on where people are and where they're moving. Are they walking in places that don't have sidewalks, for instance? Are there lots of accidents happening at certain intersections because there is a circle and no sidewalk and no real meaningful way for pedestrians to move through it? So we have to start being really like eyes on the actual subject area so that we can track that meaningfully. And we do it when we want to. And, you know, if I want to know the migration patterns of Canada geese, I can get that in a heartbeat. We can get that same data in our smart cities based on that kind of geotagging.
So you talked about how do you, about the equity using these technologies, and you talked about bias in the data. Can you give examples of how data could be used to create these biased outcomes?
So in situations, let's take a neighborhood has been traditionally underserved in terms of dollars invested in the area. There are shrinking participations in classrooms in the local school. There are lots of reports of crime and things of that nature. And there is a lower value in the property taxes. So what a person may decide is this area is really kind of crumbling and being destitute. And we shouldn't invest a whole lot. We would be better off closing that school, relocating people to a new area, letting those houses go, just write them off. Where if you were unbiased in that situation, you might see opportunities for an influx by offering a recreational center, offering other resources to engage with the community and give them things to do instead of constantly taking things away. So a bias in the potential of that area can cause you to under-invest in it so that these things exacerbate to a level where it's almost irretrievable. And I think that's a common thing that we see in a lot of residential areas, because it's like, well, they're not performing, so they can't be rewarded with the investment of these dollars.
Yeah, I guess I had one question. I guess for Seamless, what do you see as the deliverables? I guess you could say, like, do you envision this program where you provide analysis to the institutions that are making the decisions, or do you see it, the outputs of the program being maybe standards?
So I think it depends on what you mean by the deliverable. It depends on how Seamless would be engaged. If we were working with, let's say, the entire state of Maryland, and they wanted us to look at the state zip code by zip code and look at smart city technology and deployment, I think for a deliverable, we would start out with making sure that the systems itself is equitable. Are we serving everyone in an equitable way? Equitable and equality aren't the same thing. Equality is everyone gets the same chair. It's the same height, it's on the same level. Equity is the person who's 6'9" gets a different chair than the person who's 4'11". So we want to make sure that the technology is being applied zip code to zip code in an equitable way. And then we want to look at how the data metrics are being applied. Are we really looking at the right data, or are we looking at the same data repackaged over and over again? And then are we reinforcing bias, or are we putting our eye more toward the viability of the residents and making sure that everyone can actually thrive versus exist? So there are a lot of different ways to look at deliverables, but it would depend on the kind of partnership that we would take and how we can be the most impactful. And I think something like this would be a project that you would work on and have maybe 2 or 3 years where you can have benchmarks and make improvements, because some of these are expensive improvements, if we're being honest. And some of these are the battle of beliefs, which it takes time to reverse certain thought processes.
So we have a number of questions online. The first, a comment and a question. The comment is, your example of transferring blood was good. Are there more examples that you can elucidate related to, I guess, to the use of drones?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So we have, at least where I'm from in Baltimore City, we have a lot of neighborhoods and areas that are really hard to navigate during certain areas, at certain times of day rather. So traffic congestion is a really big deal. And we have a lot of older populations. So if we were able to deliver, let's say, your prescription by a drone, instead of trying to figure out how to get the mobility bus to the person and get them to the pharmacy and then get them back home and try to do that outside the rush hour window and do all of these things, it might be easier to get that particular medicine to the person via drone. That's an idea. It doesn't have to be done, but it's a way of using the technology to deliver for people who are often invisible in the planning of cities and their infrastructures. Drones could also be used in novel ways to enhance educational opportunities. So for those schools that don't have a lot of technology or access to technology, during the pandemic, we saw this, where companies were making partnerships with local school systems to offer technology because the divide between those who have access and don't was so great. Drones offer an opportunity to improve that access without as much of an investment. And what that access can do is it can kids love drones, number one, but it makes people more excited about technology, how it can be used, what can be done with it. And it gives us the benefit of young minds creating new use cases for the technology in ways that we might not have thought of. So I think that drones can sort of be a way to bridge the gap between certain services, to improve access, and to often level the playing field for a lot of different groups.
Another question was from Donald Duncan. How are you thinking about the cybersecurity issues associated with use of drones in smart cities?
So there are lots of different ways to deal with cybersecurity with autonomous instruments like a drone. And it really depends on the use of the drone in which situations. So in the rural areas in our example for the research, we have, the system is pretty well locked down so that it can't be hacked by an outside force. Cybersecurity is always going to be an issue for all of the smart cities and the smart technology that we use. So we're constantly watching these innovations and applying them as much as possible, but we also want to allow the right kind of access and room for the growth in the application of the technology. So while we are trying to keep outside forces from coming in, we're also trying to leave just enough room for the inside forces to grow it and move it to a different level of use. But there are definitely cybersecurity implications that we are taking into consideration. And at Seamless, we don't try to be all the things. So we absolutely have partnerships with those who are specializing in those areas to make sure that we're crossing all of our T's and dotting all of our I's.
Another question online. You made a comment about equal versus equitable. And the question is, when you talk about equitable, do you mean using IoTs, we have less problems of being political or influencing certain classes of persons?
So if I understand the question, when I talk about equitable in the IoT, it's not necessarily about being political. Your refrigerator, your microwave, your Roomba, they all are into the Internet of Things and they're not political devices. So that technology is reporting on usage, frequency, energy, all of these things that are required to run it. But then you have other items that are absolutely able to be influenced by political things like your smartphones, your tablets, and ads that are being served to you. So it really depends on, one, for your smartphones, your tablets, things like that, it depends on your history. So the things that you're served are going to mimic the kinds of places that you visit. If you visit a lot of places online that are leaning toward one sort of political end of the spectrum more than others, you'll be served more information from that. If you visit places that are owned by people that lean in that political direction, your phone will pick up on that and will follow that and serve you more of those kinds of ads. So if you've ever had the opportunity to be with someone that you haven't seen in a while, and then when you get back, you're getting ads served to you that you hadn't been before, it's because your phone and GPS communicated with their phone and GPS, and now it's serving, because you visited them, you must like them, you must think like them, and it's a snowball. And so what happens is that's how you can get that political leaning, through what you visit, what your friends visit, what your families visit, and it can be done that way. Not all of the IoT is so sensitive, but some parts are.
Um,
I can hear him, so if I need to repeat it, I can repeat it for the Zoom members. I think it's on now.
Take
No?
this. Take this.
Yeah, you don't need to press.
Hello? Okay. You mentioned something about the guidelines for the misuse of the technology. Could you please tell us more about it?
So there are lots of ways to misuse this kind of technology. You can misuse smart city technology in order to further disenfranchise a group, to create barriers to access for certain groups. A good example is if you look at West Baltimore versus East Baltimore, environmentally, their infrastructure is different. There are very few sewer drains in West Baltimore. There are very few green spaces, where in the east part of the city, it's the opposite. Lots of sewer drains, storm drains, trees, grassy areas, things of that nature. So the West Baltimore represents an area where the planning and the infrastructure that was set in motion was kind of misused, so that it's almost like a punishment versus a reward system. And when you have something like that, it's very easy to overlook when you are just seeing data points, when you don't see the whole picture, which is why that kind of GIS integration that allows you to see streets, buildings, trees, trash cans, sewer openings, all of those kinds of things, it's harder to hide inequity in that system, in that model. So that's the really good concrete example that I can give of something that's happening right now. So when it rains in certain areas in the city, they flood every single time because there's nowhere for the water to go. And we know that there's nowhere for the water to go, but there still aren't any sewers. And so that means that year after year, that choice has been made to maintain that infrastructure versus changing it.
You started off with the phrase, and I think we've talked about it a little bit, if you have equity in mind, you will decrease bias. I think it's a great heuristic, if I could steal from the name of your company.
Well, you go on and let me get you a t-shirt.
And when we come to designing systems, those kinds of heuristics are nice, but they need to be really measurable. And so, if equity, would it be just as useful if that heuristic was, if you have diversity in mind, you will address bias? Because I think we can measure diversity in a lot of different dimensions easier, and we can require it, quite frankly, in a system design. Equity is a bit more of a balance of values, and it's hard to specify that in a system design, whereas specifying addressing diversity therefore reduces bias. Does that water down that heuristic? Would it still be useful? Do you have any sense on that?
I think you can have both, because equity can be measured based on how you want to implement it. So if you are thinking with equity in mind, you are thinking as you plan that city that there have to be a certain number of wheelchair cuts in the sidewalk so that there's accessibility for more people. If you're thinking about diversity, it may not come to mind that you need to have a certain number of sidewalk cuts in order to allow people with wheelchairs to access it. It just may come into your mind that these stores are wheelchair friendly, but the sidewalk might not be. So they're both good things and they're both necessary, but they're both the heuristics that you measure with because you need them both. They kind of feed off of each other. It's like an Ouroboros, it just keeps going around. And what we need to think about is how we apply what we want the outcome to be and the measuring process. So you have to work backwards. You can't just go in thinking, oh, well, we're going to just build a better shopping mall in this area. You have to work backwards and say, who are these customers? Who do we want to serve? How do we want to serve them? What do we do to make that happen? And that's going to give you the equity and diversity at the same time. And then you can measure them both with the phone data, with the information that you learn about who's coming and who's not. So you can measure the phones that have disability options turned on or off. If those options are turned on, are these people coming or are they not coming? You can track that. Your phones have a lot of data on you to determine how diverse the population is that is accessing that whole network. Are the people that we want coming, or are they not? So we can look at diversity and equity and access and all of those things as separate data points and then kind of correct the system. In some cases, I feel like with smart cities and IoT, you have to overfit. I know we don't want to do that, but we have to overfit because we've underfit for so long that we are missing too many pieces.
So another question from the chat. What have been key hurdles to smart city deployments? Cost, technology, policy standards, et cetera. What do you think are some of the key hurdles to smart city deployments?
I'm going to say yes. And then I'm going to say it's also thought process, because there are a lot of people in positions to make policy and make changes and make suggestions who just aren't in the right mindset to adopt the technology and maximize it for what it's worth. Despite the influx of technology, a lot of the people in the positions to make these changes are just not thoroughly embracing the technology and how it can work. And so they will cite things like it costs too much money, the policy will never get passed. They will make a lot of different reasons for why it can't be done because it's a thought process. And unfortunately, for a lot of the politicians that are in that position or the policymakers, they are just too set in their ways and too stuck in how things used to be to actually adopt that kind of change. If you use the technology well, and if states are creative, they can do a lot of it without, bankrupting themselves. It requires collaboration, it requires creativity, and it requires a willingness to serve the people that live in these places. And some people, this is a job. Some people, it's a passion. And eventually you have to start voting for who's going to represent you in the best way, because otherwise you're going to get more of the same. So it's not just on the policymaker, it's also on us as the citizenry to also make our voices known that we want better cities and we want stronger, thriving metropolitan areas and thriving and healthy rural areas as well. You know what? I will take I just knew I was going to stand here and be staring like while the Jeopardy music played and someone pulled me off the stage with a hook. So I'm like, yes, ask all of the questions.
From Vivek, he asked, what have been the key hurdles to smart city? Oh, you did that? Oh, okay. From Greg Koenig, he asked, is it possible to generate electricity by piezoelectric in subway elevators and in high traffic areas for people?
Is it possible? Yes. Is it happening often? No. And we could be doing that in spin cycle rooms and gyms as well and connecting that into the grid. This is just another way of creatively thinking about the problem and ways to address it. So yeah, we could absolutely be doing that. And no, we're not really maximizing on that particular area of power generation. I would love to see it. I really would, especially connected to the spin cycle room.
So next question from Amruthar Narasimhan. When you talk about equitable, do you mean using IoTs we have less? We done that? Oh. Excuse me. From Fazal Mahmood, given the recent escalation in cyber threats, in your opinion, what type of security challenges would be presented to smart city deployments?
So for me, it's really looking at how well you can close a system that has to access public networks in the way that it does. IoT technology is not exclusive to the city that it's located in. These devices are communicating to outside entities. And when you can't control who they're talking to, the back doors all start to open. And that's where the cybersecurity threats come in. And it's also the biggest threat in terms of cybersecurity is the individual user themselves, because they are constantly hooking into networks and sharing things without thinking about how secure the Wi-Fi is where they are and what kinds of data they are sharing and things of that nature. So we're never going to overcome humanity in terms of how they use the technology, but we can start to look at ways of closing those back doors based on how these pieces of technology communicate with their mothership, for lack of a better term. So your Roomba, how it's communicating and what it's communicating, your refrigerator, your stove, your phones, your tablets, all of these things, these automatic check-ins that happen when you go into restaurants and things of that nature. Who are those things talking to? And then being sensitive to how we can close off some of the back doors in that communication process. So your devices are communicating with at least 2 or 3 different kinds of hosts at any moment, which opens up these channels for hackers to come in. And we've seen that with autonomous vehicles, and we've seen that with other things where people have been able to infiltrate systems and affect them in different ways. So in order for that to happen, you have to have a 2-pronged approach of looking at how they communicate, but you can't really factor out the humans in that process.
Our second invited guest is Dr. Mashariki. He's going to talk to us about building the metaverse to solve our most intractable urban challenges. Dr. Mashariki is a senior principal scientist and leads worldwide AI smart cities initiatives at NVIDIA, where he works with private sector partners to build complex AI solutions that solve intractable urban challenges. Amenra is also a visiting scholar at the Georgetown Massive Data Institute, where he partners with academic, the public sector, and thought leaders to shape best practices and strategies on how to use data and AI to maximize impact in communities. Dr. Mashariki was previously the Global Director of the AI Lab at World Resources Institute. There he worked across programs, international offices, and centers to identify AI solutions to turn big ideas into action to sustain our natural resources, the foundation of economic opportunity and human well-being. Dr. Mashariki has served as head of machine learning at Urbint, adjunct faculty at NYU Center for Urban Science Progress, and fellow at the Harvard Ash Center for Democratic Governance and Innovation. Dr. Mashariki served as the first chief analytics officer for the city of New York under the de Blasio administration and the director of the Mayor's Office of Data Analytics. In the Obama administration, Dr. Mashariki was appointed to be the White House Fellow, as well as the Chief Technology Officer for the Office of Personnel Management of the United States. Ahmed had a doctorate in engineering from Morgan State University, as well as a master's and Bachelor of Science degree in computer science from Howard and Lincoln University, respectively. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Mashariki to the podium.
So thank you, Jeff, Akinwale, APL, and then ACM chapter for inviting me to come talk. There's 2 things I don't enjoy. The first one is wearing a suit or a tie or anything of the like. And the second is speaking to slides. So while I brought some slides, I probably will jump around and not use them too much. What's not, I'm a little embarrassed because what's not in that ridiculous looking bio is that I spent about, what was it, Wayne, 6 years at APL? Working with Wayne Lushin, Jeff, I would say up to the time that I left, I was very technical. And then once I left, I became began to, I always say I switched from being a computer scientist to a technologist, because I moved more into thinking about how technology can be used and applied. And so a lot of this conversation is going to be sort of how I think about technology, which is understanding. So a lot of my career, which was in the government, I spent a lot of time thinking about how technology can solve, that we can use the technology that we have now to solve some really intractable and tough problems. Now at NVIDIA, I not only think about that, but also think about what are the problems that are forcing us to think about new and innovative technologies. So when you work at a company like NVIDIA, that is all about advancing technology in a big way and using advanced capabilities, you have that opportunity to think beyond what is and ask the what if. The way that I'm going to structure this conversation is around thinking about digital twins. And I just want to level set. A digital twin is not just a replica of physical reality, but also a rich interface of the information that is associated with, and we'll have a robust discussion around digital twins. The way I think about digital twins with respects to cities is how do we replicate a city in such a way that we can better understand the city, learn more about the city, and then apply solutions that have an impact on the residents. I can tell you from my time in New York City, and I've spent time working with mayors, not only domestic, but also international, you would be shocked what leaders of your cities don't know about their cities, right? And so part of the process of digital twins is really identifying what do we know about our city, what's the gap, and then filling that gap, and then using that 360-degree view of a city to solve some really complex problems. So currently, digital twins are being used, right? So digital twins are solving some of our greatest challenges, whether it's wildfire prevention, 5G signal propagation, traffic management, energy systems. Digital twins are being used, right? The concept, it's a catchy buzzword, but digital twins have existed for a while. The question becomes, how do we grow the fidelity and capability of digital twins? And from NVIDIA's perspective, the way we think about this is a digital twin must have a high level of reality, right? So, you know, some folks were, when I came in, some folks were, a few, more than one or two, mentioned my bio in terms of saying, like, I've been bouncing around all over the place. And that's fair. And I think one of the things is that I spent about 4 or 5 years as the chief analytics officer for New York City. And those were some of the more stressful times of my life because my office was used as a mechanism for solving some of New York City's toughest problems. While it's scary at times, and it burned out some of our best data scientists, young kids in their early 20s, burned out, working 20-hour days for weeks on end to respond to any number of issues that were happening in the city. I'll give you for instance, we got, you know, if this thing wasn't being live streamed, there's so many other examples I could give you, but I got to be careful. I do tend to share the true, honest sort of view of these things. So you mentioned curb cuts in your conversation. So cities have to be ADA compliant in terms of whether it's curb cuts or whether it's ramps in schools and so on and so forth. And so what Obama's Department of Justice sued New York City because they said that we weren't ADA compliant. And so the law offices in New York City essentially the reason why they said they weren't ADA compliant was because the New York Times published an article, and you can probably pull this up. They published a few articles where they talked about how students with disabilities were being bused farther out away from their home to go to schools that had ramps and so on and so forth that were ADA compliant. And because it took them longer to get to school, to be able to go to an ADA compliant building, Americans with Disabilities Act, an ADA compliant building, that was an undue requirement on someone with a disability, which was illegal based on the Americans with Disability Act. And so the DOJ sued New York City to make them sort of spend a lot of money to make these buildings compliant. And so the city was, well, the law office, the mayor's lawyers had mulled over this for I don't know how long. What I do know is they came to my office and they said, so New York Times did this article and they had all of these stories where they had like stories about mothers carrying their children up the steps and doing all things that they shouldn't have to do. And so they came to my office and they said, look, we have until next week to prove to the DOJ that they're wrong, that it doesn't take longer for students with disabilities to get to school than students with disabilities. Can you prove that in the numbers? So their tactics, so they tried every other tactic. Their final tactic with a week to deadline, it was like a week and a half. So we had a week to get them the numbers and then they would respond. Their final tactic was for us to prove our own numbers and basically say, your numbers are wrong. The back of the napkin analysis you did was wrong. Our numbers are right. So what did my team do? We got a bunch of data from Department of Education and then we tracked as the crow flies, every student with a disability, because we know every student with a disability and the school that they go to, and then we essentially did the math to count up, you know, how long, but we just did it as the crow flies. You know why we had to do it as the crow flies? Anybody care to hazard a guess? Maybe, probably, but no, that's not why. Has something to do with the law offices. Because if they had to take it to court, we didn't have access to the Google algorithm, so we couldn't prove that the Google algorithm in court was correct, right? So if we used Google Maps to map it, we would get called out in court and say, well, how do we know that this algorithm that Google Maps used is, you know, the most optimized and so on and so forth. So the lawyers were like, you can't use Google Maps or any of these other maps, you have to use as the crow flies. And so this is just, and we struggled with that because we didn't know, there were so many things we didn't know about the city. Case in point, what happened was one of my team did the work and then they had to present. The bad news was that DOJ and New York Times was correct. It was taking longer for students with disabilities on par to travel to school. But with the data that we found, and we used a lot of proxy data, we were actually able to show where it was happening most, which was tipping the scale. So we didn't have to comply with every school. There were just certain neighborhoods where it was just really bad. And so when you talk about equity, the data, if you have the right data, if you know enough about your city, you can make decisions based on clarity instead of saying, well, we'll go to the biggest jurisdictions, say, well, actually, we can go to one of the places where there's fewer schools, but every single school in this area actually is not compliant. So if we do So instead of spending $50 million, we'll spend $8 million on these key locations, and we'll actually drive down by like 60, 70% the number of non-compliant schools. And of course, you don't have to be 100% compliant for the DOJ to get off your back. You just couldn't just be egregious about it. And so we moved the numbers down. I tell that story to talk about, when people talk about cities, they talk about traffic and they talk about public safety and so on and so forth. But these are the types of problems that pop up every single day. The problem with problems like this is that in cities, you don't have the one. You have at least 80 going on simultaneously, right? And then they tend to have an impact on each other. So what I always used to say about New York was that New York wasn't problematic as a city, because whenever stuff happened in New York, it happened big. And the impact was crazy. And some of you who are not New Yorkers saw that with COVID. You saw how it just hit New York City just so hard. Because there's such a chain reaction in such a big way with New York that COVID hits, has an impact on, they shut down the MTA system. The MTA system has an outsized impact on low-income people who have to use public transportation to get to work. So remember, they closed down everything except for like the fast food joints and all that stuff. But the people who worked at all of those places had to use public transportation. So they also shut down public, there's this cascade of things that happen in such a way. It is hard to make just one decision and have it not propagate across at least 15, 20, 30 other things, right? And so what digital twins allow for you to do is look at the full city. So you don't go in, and for the tech people, you know about this concept called a point solution, right? You don't go in and solve one thing. No such thing in New York City. You have to solve at least 9, 10, 15 other things in concert. And so digital twins are really key to thinking about simple things that stack up and create a complex system. So you're solving the system, not the problem. So we've got assets, factories, cities, planetary. So the scale can grow. You can be looking at small things like assets, but you can also be scaling. So building a digital twin, right? So it's very simple, very simple. You get input. Your input can come from sensors, whether that's IoT sensors, human sensors, any type of sensors your input can come in. You have to build a full fidelity visualization, full 3D visualization of your city. That is key, to have a 360-degree view of your city. And then you have to add physics simulation through microservices. And what that means is the physics has to be inserted and introduced into your 3D environment. And I won't go into detail. I have some slides that'll go into detail. And then your autonomous systems actually exist and interact in that system, and they create data about the system, and then you use that data and it just continues to flow. And so your system becomes this living, breathing environment. And that's how you build out a digital twin. Your digital twin should not be a static view of your space. A digital twin should be a living, existing, real world, real-time view of your space and processing in that way. So how digital twins are made: ground truth data, crowdsourced data, and has to have comprehensive coverage. So digital twins are not simple to build. So you can't just get an Unreal Engine and get a visualization of a city, then that's your digital twin. It has to be connected to real data and then also be crowdsourcing data in many different ways. All right. So the power of digital twins in cities, I think about it in 4 ways. It brings AI and ML. It brings simulation, brings visualization, and it brings optimization, right? So let's start from the bottom up. So optimization. City problems with optimization can exist in terms of most cities, you don't know this, I know this. Most cities, even New York, especially New York, EMS drivers have to be appropriately placed around the city in order to respond, especially to cardiac type 911 calls, because every second matters in those types of calls. And so if an EMS is hanging out at a hospital or hanging out at the firehouse, it won't get to some of the most dire calls. So one of the things they asked my office to do was build out a model to identify where to place EMS around the city. So they're never just like, parked in a garage somewhere waiting for a call. They're actually stationed in and around the city. And that's because there's not enough EMS, city EMS, to respond to all of the 911 calls it gets, right? And so they have to be strategically placed. So you want to optimize your use of that asset and that capability. Simulation, and this one is a big one. We talk with folks all the time. They want to test. If I build low-income housing here, how does that affect traffic? How does that affect public safety concerns? One of the big questions, there's this whole group in every city called NIMBY, right? Not in my backyard. And so whenever the city, New York City at one point committed to building 90 new shelters to house the homeless. New York City and Washington, D.C. are the only two, well, Washington, D.C. is not a city, it's a district, are the only two urban municipalities in the United States that have a right to housing law, which says if some person walks up to any city official and says, I need housing tonight, if they aren't provided that housing, they can make a case to sue the city for not providing housing. Only two municipalities, New York and DC. So shelters were getting overcrowded. Mayor decided, hey, I'm gonna open up 90 new shelters across New York City. In that instance, many communities were like, no, do not open up a shelter in our community. Why do they usually don't want shelters opened up in their community? There's usually two key reasons, almost all the time. Crime, they say crime is gonna go up and property value is gonna go down, right? They always say that, always say that. With simulation, you can actually, if you have real data, real-time data, you can actually begin to simulate what opening up shelters in which neighborhoods actually looks like. You can simulate any additional traffic, foot traffic, motor vehicle traffic, so on and so forth. You can simulate these things and make the case that it's actually not going to shift. Key thing is once you build that shelter, you have to then track that data and bring it back into your digital twin, right? And so this is the hardest part about a digital twin is keeping that feedback going into your digital twin. So your digital twin ultimately becomes a true replica of your city. Visualization, 3D visualization. 3D visualization is important for a lot of things. Anybody ever heard of the concept air rights? No, of course not, because you don't live in New York City. So in New York City, there's a such thing as air rights. What that means is if I have a 50-story building, if I have a 10-story building, and then somebody builds a 50-story building right behind me, the developer can buy the air rights of that 10-story building, so that story's 10 and up. Why would they want to do that? Because they can charge more if there's a view. So if they buy the rights, then you can't build a building to obstruct the view of the 50-story building. So they literally buy the rights to that air above the 10-story building. And so 3D visualization allows for you to track, manage air, eyesight, and line of sight, sorts of things around buildings. One of the things in New York City, so one of the emergencies we got pulled into was the Legionnaire's disease had hit in the summer of 2015. And it was these cooling towers that sit on top of buildings that were emitting this spray that, so inside of cooling towers are standing water. And it became doused with, like Legionnaires sort of grew, this bacteria grew in that standing water, and then this mist comes off the cooling tower. Thank you so much. The mist comes off the cooling tower, and then people get it, and then they get Legionnaires. I think 28 New Yorkers died, and I think 128 got Legionnaires. So then they pulled in my team, and they said, we need to find every single cooling tower in New York City. Cooling towers only exist on top of buildings. And so we were sending firefighters, Department of Health. We did this machine learning model to target. Yeah, and you know, it was a slow going at first because the firefighters didn't want to climb up the steps to see if there was a cooling tower on top of the building. Like you have to go into the building, go climb up the steps if there was no elevator. If there was an elevator, like you could only hit like 5-6 buildings a day if you were a firefighter. And we needed to get this done immediately because New Yorkers were dying. So one of the things that my team started to do was, instead of sending firefighters into the buildings onto the roof, we started to actually calculate line of sight. And so we used to tell them where they could stand to be able to see a cooling tower with binoculars or some other device. So if you stood here, you could actually, in your 360-degree periphery, identify 80% of the buildings around you, whether they had a cooling tower or not, right? And so visualization is key to understand height and all of the properties that you need to solve really non-trivial issues. Now, AI and ML is interesting. Everybody talks about AI and ML. You know, people talk about the concept of smart cities. What you're hearing now, the new buzzword is a cognitive city. And that is a city, so smart cities are reactive. Things happen and your city reacts to that thing, right? You want to think very simple. It starts raining, you know, what's the dome in Dallas? The dome closes, right? Reactive, that's a smart city. Things happen and we sense through sensors, IoT, things happening, and then we can react to it. Cognitive cities using AI and ML are now sort of taking us into the space of, we don't have to be reactive anymore. We should know. Now, we always know when the weather, but how do we know other things are going to happen and when they're going to happen, right? And so how do you use AI and ML to actually predict certain things in the city are going to happen? Right, so I talked about visualization. This is a picture of New York City as a digital twin, a complete view, photorealistic view, 3D view of New York City. Here is a video of, a short video of Berlin in Omniverse technology, digital twin. The whole idea is to create a completely realistic view of your city, 100% realistic. I showed this, so this digital twin, what jumps out at you about this digital twin? Shadows. And so using ray tracing technology, your digital twin also can track and understand where shadows are at the time of day. So one of the key things about digital twins is about tracking time. So they exist over time as well. They are not a static existence. Your digital twin should exist the same way a real city does, which is how shadows, the idea of shadows also impacts which buildings get cool start to get cool at which time, based on any number of things. And so your construction strategy can shift based on where that building is and what type of light hits that building and what type of sun, what type of heat from the sun hits that building, so on and so forth. And so your digital twin should also have a time property to it as well. Now, what this shows is remember we talked about there's a 3D representation of your city, and then there's real world physics that gets introduced into your city. And so we introduced 3 types of properties into Omniverse. So real-time physics allows for us to track and understand a number of things, right? So on the left, gravity, right? You see when this robotics, when a robot picks up the foam, you see how it falls. That's a true example of what we expect to happen in real life. True physics. Blast, how things move, how things fall, how things fracture. One of the things I always say in New York City, again, a little inside. Do you know when the city knows when a building facade is about to fall off? Like a piece of a building falls off the building, that building facade comes off. Do you know when the city knows? When it hits the ground. Yes. Yes. When you're in New York City, there's this thing called sidewalk sheds. You know, when and it's an enclosure and then it's, the metal stuff over you. You know why that exists? Because something fell and the landlord, the owner of that building, is now charged with paying for a sidewalk shed to go up. So anytime you're walking under a sidewalk shed, that is there because facade is falling. Department of Buildings has one guy, I remember his name, Dan Ekenazi. Dan Ekenazi, he's the world's most preeminent expert on building facades. He can tell you, based on when the building was built, where it exists now, how high it is, all of these different properties, he can tell you, yeah, I think we need to go check that building for facade damage. Only one person. And so when you can, in real time, predict and track and then understand what pieces would fall off and the size of those pieces and where they would fall and how they would fall, you're doing a lot better than what the city can do now, right? And then I'm sure this is APL, so we know computational fluid dynamics, right? Understand the flow of gas and water and so on and so forth. And so again, this is physics-based. So you can think about cities in terms of flooding. How am I doing on time? Not 20 minutes, okay. Let me get through so we can get some questions, yeah. All right, so let me show you how this works. So this is a chip that is tracking, wait, let me go back here. So I'm just gonna do this little bit of inside baseball on Omniverse. I don't want to walk away from the thing here. Omniverse. So how do we track true physics and the movement of objects using, thank you, using real life physics, right? So you see those blue lines that are coming out of this processing unit, and it's basically tracking the air, and this is the physics that it's using. So we don't build this, right? And so some smart, computational fluid dynamics entity, like someone at APL or a group at APL builds a module that calculates the math. We take the results of that and we bring it into our 3D model, and then this is what the results would look like in a normal CFD model, right? But what we do is we actually turn those plain lines into real depiction of what the air would actually look like flowing out of that. And so the same thing here, we take the results of CFD and then turn it into, you see the smoke in the air, we actually show you visually where the smoke in the air is going around the car. So we actually don't create the physics, we model the physics in a real world, right? So you can imagine a city. So we also are building a digital twin of the whole world called Earth 2. And so you can imagine all of the complex pieces that have to go into building exact, true representation of the Earth. And the processing power and the cost to build something like that. And so that's done in Omniverse as well. Let me keep going. So again, simulating the spread of wildfires, using CFD to understand any number of things of the path and the complexity of the landscape and where that fire and then where the smoke travels. Again, the simulation doesn't take place in the model. It executes in the model, but we bring in the math. We bring the math in. We call them domain-specific solvers. And we bring them in and we represent them in the digital twin. So you can imagine multiple of these happening at the same time. So same thing, this is all, this is the digital twin. And so we can track, let me show you. So actually, let's use this one. This is one of my favorite ones. So one of the things is in terms of rolling out 5G networks, what's really important is coverage and rolling out 5G networks. So you can literally build, so Ericsson built, wait, where's my, thought I had a video here. Essentially, Ericsson built, that's a digital twin. That's not a real city. They created a real world replica. They used City Engine from Esri, took all of their 3D data, brought it in, and then actually created a model where a car is driving through and you can actually see, based on where cell towers are placed, 5G cell towers are placed, the coverage, the amount of 5G coverage a car gets driving through this area. And so you can actually identify, and using real information, the impact of cell coverage in real time on your movements around a city. All right, forget that. All right, so now let's go. So I just kind of went through the tech a little bit, but now let's think about how cities, how cities function. This is a very simple, but very reductive, but clear view of how cities actually function. So you have the city at the upper left-hand corner. Things happen in the city. People work, play, eat, all sorts of things happen in the city. From those things happening in the city, data and observations are created. So when garbage gets picked up, that piece of information gets stored somewhere at this home at this time, garbage was picked up, right? New York City sanitation, any city sanitation tracks how fast they're able to do their job. So all sorts of information about the city is being captured. So once you have that stream of data, where cities are most, have the biggest challenge is connecting those streams of data, real time or otherwise, with models of the city. Now, a model can be a statistical model, it can be a 3D model, it can be a GIS model, it can be a 3D model. Once you connect these streams of data with the model, you then create insights and knowledge about the city. The data in and of itself isn't representative of insights and knowledge about the city. It's the data with the model. Again, it can be an AI model, ML model, whatever you want. Then, once those insights and knowledge are shared with city leadership and citizens, decisions are made about the city. And then when decisions are made about the city shifts in some way, shape, or form. And then people react in that city, and then more information about that city is captured. Let me give you a quick example of that, and then I'm just going to go to two things, and then are there questions already? All right, then we can open up for questions. All right, so let me give you an example. Simple example I always use to sort of explain this round robin. In New York City, there were, back in the 90s, tons of bike accidents. Bicyclists were all over the place, crashing up against the yellow cabs, and all sorts of bicyclists were dying and getting hit, and so on and so forth. So then the bike lobbyists said, hey, we need to, so that's the city existing. Bicyclists cycling, cab drivers driving however they drive in and around New York City, pedestrians in and around New York City, but it was resulting in many fatalities for cyclists, right? So then we got that information. We said, we see fatalities happening. Let's take those fatalities and let's put them on a map and find out where they're occurring mostly, right? They're happening somewhere more than other places. So they found out where in New York City the most egregious and the most fatalities were happening with cyclists. So in those areas, they did what? They put bike lanes, right? So the city happened, we took that data, we overlaid it with a model, which was just a GIS model of the city, maps, and then we saw where in New York City these deaths were occurring for the most part, and then that was shared with city leadership, and city leadership made a decision to put bike lanes in some specific areas to test this out. And then they put the bike lanes in, and now the city is a different city. So then what happens when now you have the bike lanes? You have less space for the cars. Pedestrians are having a hard time, figuring out, should they stop for the bikes? The bikes are having a hard time figuring out, they should move with traffic and not against traffic, and they have to obey all of the laws as well. The bike lane isn't a green light all the way through. So those areas in which you put that bike lane, even more interesting traffic phenomenon began to occur. Then you have to take, and what people started to, they had to put up the signs that said, must follow, all the rules of the road, blah, 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 right? And so this is a continuous feedback loop and round robin. It never stops. Before, it would take sometimes years for this to go one loop around in a city. Something to happen, for there to be a model that says, hey, this thing is actually happening and happening in a real way that we need to fix it. And then getting it to the right people, the biggest bottleneck is the leadership, and then making the change in the city. Now, with digital twins and AI and ML, happens like this. You can make those changes immediately, right? You saw that with COVID. Some cities, not all cities, some cities were quicker to respond and react and engage and make decisions, right? But that's what I mean by smart cities. It's in the past. We don't want a city just to react to bad things happening. We want cities to begin to predict that certain things can happen and probably will happen. In the security space, in HIPAA, so I know Wayne and other folks here at APL work in the medical space. HIPAA, what does HIPAA say? HIPAA is in place not because it will guarantee that bad things don't happen. It's in place such that when bad things happen, you have a process in place, you have a mechanism in place to respond to those bad things. The same thing, bad things are going to happen in cities, period, point blank. So it's actually unacceptable anymore for a city to not respond to big, scary things that happen to cities. Because anyone who takes office in any metropolitan entity, domestic or international, who doesn't think something bad is going to happen is just not fit to lead that city. And so if we know things are going to happen in cities, how do we get out in front of those things and begin to predict the types of things that can happen, right? So let me stop there and just kind of show you two examples of what I would refer to as very low fidelity digital twins. When I was in New York City, we built a building intelligence toolkit. It used to be connected. I guess it's no longer connected to the data pipeline that we set up. Obviously, that was like at least 8 years ago or so. But you used to be able to put in your address, any address in New York City, and you could go and you could get the most up-to-date information around the codes and any other information around what was happening in and around that building. But it was a 3D model of the building, very low fidelity. Every building had data associated with it, but it was all static data. It was just data in a database. And so when you clicked on a building, it would pull up the data and then show you everything about that building, right? It's a very low fidelity digital twin. You're starting with just a 3D footprint of the city. This one, we took that same 3D model and said, hey, we want to track for Vision Zero initiatives. Vision Zero is we want to have zero collision, pedestrian fatalities in New York City. And so we had to track traffic patterns, where collisions were taking place, the number of injuries and deaths that were taking place at any real time, and then cyclists. And so you see those moving dots. You know, now they have, I'm sure you all know about this, now they have these data brokers who sell. So when you use your phone and your phone says, hey, can you give me permission to sell your data, and so on and so forth, they actually sell to data brokers like SafeGraph. They anonymize the data, but they literally can track where you walk and where you go in an anonymous fashion. So you can actually track foot traffic and so on and so forth. And so this has foot traffic, so it tracks pedestrians and so on and so forth. And again, this used to be connected. Some of this was live streamed from like Waze data and so on and so forth. And so these are just examples of very low fidelity digital twins way back in 2018, 2017. And so we're in 2022 now, and it's all about physics-based digital twins. I'm going to stop there and hopefully have a good conversation for the next 5-10 minutes.
Yeah, there are a lot of interesting questions.
There are how much?
Like the previous talk.
All right, so first question from Gustavo. Can you comment on similarities and differences between digital twin and metaverse?
So the way you want to think about metaverse, it's, can we take this thing down? This looks ridiculous. Anyway, no?
You can just project the...
All right, I'll just project project the slide deck. That's- All right. So yes, right? The simple, I'm going to try to go through these really, the simple answer is a digital twin is a reflection of the physical existence of a city. Metaverse is when people who exist in the real world then insert themselves into this space and interact and engage. Digital twins are really built to understand infrastructure, and understand assets, and understand the movement and interaction around those assets and infrastructure. Not so much building social engagement and social interaction. I think metaverse is more focused on the social interaction side, and the way we think about specifically digital twins. Now you can use Omniverse to build the metaverse, right? But you can also use Omniverse to build a digital twin. We're less interested in personalities and cohesion of people in the digital twin. We're interested in the movement of things in and around a digital twin. George.
Let's go with green. It's on. Yes, you hear me now. Yeah, great talk. Thanks. Digital twin has many models, like your simple Foursquare. It actually had plural over there for models, and somewhat reminiscent of departments within, city governments and the like. So the challenges of getting those different models to talk to each other. Now, for example, in Omniverse, what's the infrastructure, what's the interoperability, what's the typing of words so that confusion is not doesn't happen between the models? Have you guys addressed that in
Yeah,
video?
absolutely. So literally, Omniverse is a platform that is a blank slate for you to bring your 3D representation of your city into Omniverse. So who can make this Civil 3D, City Engine, Unreal Engine? There's at least a number of, Autodesk has a capability to build 3D maps and 3D models of cities. You can literally create a digital twin of the city of Baltimore, and each piece, a specific section of Baltimore, come from Autodesk, a specific section come from Civil 3D, a specific section come from being made in Unreal Engine, another one being made in City Engine from Esri. And they all come together and they get standardized in this format called USD in Omniverse. And so Omniverse actually then creates your digital twin based on that sort of patchwork of 3D models coming in. So we accept any and all 3D models, and we standardize across all of those models into one format. Yeah.
AIs, and so when you're talking about predictive behavior of time histories and parameters that are changing beyond the built infrastructure, let's say, which is what USD is really good at, right? What's the does Omniverse have that kind of how do physics models? It's actually kind of easy with physics models. You bring in hydrology models, you bring in water management models, you bring in traffic models. Yeah. How do they talk to each other in Omniverse?
Well, I mean, it's the same
USD
exact thing.
And the same. Huh?
Same exact thing. You bring in, you partner with third-party entities, so we could technically partner with APL if APL built a physics model of something, some physical, some explosion. And we would actually be able to pull that in to represent that piece of Omniverse. So any of those models can come in. It would have to be, George, you and I couldn't sit down and build our own thing and then punch it in. We would actually have to partner with NVIDIA to make it integrated into the system. That's right. Yeah. Let's keep, I'm gonna go quick on the answers then. Okay. Yeah, let me go quick on the answers.
Okay. Yeah, next question online from Amruthar. While you can determine in your model the crime increases in New York, a simple analysis may reveal defunding police in New York. It may not be necessary to do all these complicated analysis to reveal simple truth. More comment. Okay. Can the speaker comment if digital twins could be used to track disease evolution, for example, COVID-19, by mapping homes affected?
Yes, yes, right? So just really quickly, one of the things that we did not have the capability, remember back to 2020 March, when no one knew if this was airborne, right? And everyone, was, it was crazy town. And so if we were able to build a model tracking sort of wind and flow of air, and could actually track people who contracted it based on the movement of air, then we would have been able to say clearly, hey, this thing is actually airborne, and most people are getting it because in these spaces where we see air moving in this space and so on and so forth. And so you can actually track that. I think, again, it's about the fidelity of the data that you can get. So any question that starts with, can a digital twin? The answer is it can if you have the data that represents that, and also understand the physics behind the existence of that thing. Those two things have to come into, so you got three things: the 3D representation, data about that space, and then the true physics around that space. And you can model anything.
Yeah, hello. So this is a great segue into my question on your the model that you showed up there, where the data goes into the model. And I love that idea, but then are there any examples where the model comes out and someone says, well, that doesn't make sense, something's wrong with the data? So you're not going around the loop anymore. Now you're going directly back to your data to modulate your data input, or to inform your data input, whether you need less fidelity, more fidelity, stuff like that. Do you have examples of actually going reverse and changing your data?
Yes, so thank you for that question. So implicit in that sort of very reductive round robin is that one thing I learned in New York City, and I don't know if that should be something that you all write on the walls here, your first 4, 5, 6 models are always wrong. We had a functioning rule that your first models are always wrong, because you have to apply it to do ground truthing to actually test the model. Let me give you a quick example that you asked on that. So in the Legionnaires thing, we were running machine learning models to tell firefighters where there were likely going to be cooling towers on top of a building. The first night, I remember this was a Sunday. My team worked on Saturday to get a model out to firefighters, and then we had a citywide leadership so the mayor had us call in every day. And I remember my son was 2 years old at the time, and I was in his bed trying to put him down. It was like 6:30 on a Sunday, and I was laying in the bed with him, with an earbud, listening to this conference call that the mayor required all of us to call in on. And the chief of police, the fire chief, was like, yeah, you gave us 80,000 buildings to go to on Saturday, and we only we lopped off 60,000. So why? He says, because firefighters know that there cannot be a cooling tower on a building under 7 stories, right? So our first model included buildings under 7 stories because we didn't know that that was a reality, right? But the firefighters knew, so they were like, any building under 7 stories tall, take it off the list, because we know there cannot be a cooling tower due to regulation on a building under 7 stories. So implicit in that model is that internal round robin of the data might be bad, the model might suck, let's keep doing this. And once you get true insight, then you push it up to city leadership. So that has to happen multiple times.
Yeah, question from me. I was just curious, what are generally the simulation times for these digital twins? So like if you add you add a bike lane and then you want to see the effect, what's that time look like?
Real time. And real time meaning whatever, like the bike in your digital twin will be going the same pace as it would be going in real life, and you can track all of that in the same real time. And also understand that all of this is happening under accelerated compute power, right? So supercomputers and GPUs and so on and so forth to facilitate that. So you do get a speedy.
Yeah. What's the optimal level of abstraction when making a digital twin of an entity? I mean, what is the level of detail that needs to be modeled?
The quick answer is depending on what your goal is for building that digital twin. So I couldn't answer optimal. I would say what tends to be the case that I've seen is the highest fidelity, which is usually as close to functioning in real world as possible. I mean, we've built digital twins of Amazon's warehouse, and it functions just like how, because their warehouse has all of these robots, and so we actually build digital twins of how the robots function. And so the instructions that they give to the digital, so I think it's like from 12 a.m. to 4 a.m. or something like that, in this cavernous warehouse, the robots are doing all sorts of stuff. We actually have to replicate that, because then the people who then run that same model in real life, and it should actually do the same exact thing. The robot arms pick the same exact things. So down to the leaves on a tree. If you were modeling a digital twin, you should have trees that the leaves fall over time, and the same way leaves fall in real life, because that may have an impact on any number of things. One of them could be construction, how you track construction over time. I just made that up, but you see what I mean? So for instance, when I was the head of AI for Urbint, we used to track when people used to dig in the ground and when they would hit gas pipes. And so we used to predict when an excavator would hit a gas pipe. There are so many things that happen in a city that makes digging complex in terms of erosion, if there's mud nearby. There's so many things, and those things happen over time. So your digital twin has to be pretty high fidelity. So I would say it just as complex as you can make it.
Yeah, one over Zoom. How can we connect with you and the broad community that is pursuing dynamic digital twins for applications ranging from what you mentioned, such as aerospace, et cetera?
I think Jeff has my information, and we'll share it out. Would love to connect with anyone.
Second question, what is the impact of citizen scientist initiatives on creation of digital twins? How does that evolve after creation of digital twin?
Great question. The quick answer is that, again, remember one of my slides talked about crowdsourcing data. And so citizen scientists know a lot about hyperlocal pieces of information about cities. And so we should be tapping into citizen scientists. So I think if we build a digital twin the right way, you actually grow the ability for citizen scientists to learn from the digital twin, but also contribute to the digital twin. So you should actually be growing that group at the same rate that you're growing the fidelity and capability of your digital twin. So I think it's an important resource for digital twin citizen scientists.
Yeah. So you talked about it's got to have some substantial compute. Can you quantify that? What does that mean when you say substantial compute to do that? Just not exactly, but give us a swag, right? Give us a sense of what that is.
I would say at least 4 GPUs. The components have to be built and running on GPUs themselves, dedicated GPUs, these physics, real-life physics components that are introduced. And depending on the size of your digital twin and all the things that you want it to do, I mean, you're looking at a very large footprint of GPUs. We could be talking hundreds, close to supercomputers. Yeah.
I have a quick question. I'm glad to see you have I'm a 5G guy, doing a lot of 5G stuff within IEEE and within APL as well. So you showed a simulation of different types of base stations, so densification of cells. Have you tried to see the throughput or any kind of obstruction, how that affects?
Yes. So I'm going to get you the actual video. Matter of fact, if you Google NVIDIA Ericsson 5G, the video's online. We showed it at, I think, this year's conference. It's a longer video that shows what happens where the car goes and is building obstruction and other types of obstruction, and it shows where the signal and how the signal grows and reconnects and how other cell sites connect and so on and so forth.
Which conference is that?
I'm sorry?
Which conference? Is it?
NVIDIA's conference, GTC.
Oh, okay. I see. All right.
It's GPU Tech Conference.
Pretty interesting talk. Thank you.
Great question. Thank you.
So we are kind of completed 2 talks. We have been kind of progressing. The first seminar was all 4 virtual, right? The second seminar, we had 1 virtual, 1 in person, and third again became all virtual. And this is, we're fortunate enough to have both the speakers in person. So we are making progress. And thank you for all who came. And thank you for who still dialed in. I know somebody was telling it's dinner time, we have to go, but they still stayed on. There are a lot of things happening, and this thing would not have been possible without my colleagues. So I'd like to really thank my colleagues, APL management, ACM headquarters, and Jeff, Wale, have been constant supporter from the very beginning. Random, Tamim, and Ken have been helping us in the background. We also have our new colleague, Ryan Pepito, was asking questions. Ryan, I'd like to thank you. I'd like to invite Jeff as speakers, and maybe everybody, why don't you come over, just take a group picture with the speakers. Mitch, you'd like to come down? Mitch? Is he coming down? Okay, he's coming down. So we'll just take a group picture, if you don't mind, just with all the speakers and whoever in the room. Mitch, like just take a picture of us? Yeah. Yeah, let's do it here. Dijan, I'm just put this up here, just some of the things we are still doing. There is a APL IEEE in collaboration with APL Department of Homeland Security, OUSD, having a seminar on 7th of November, Fast Responder Tactical Network. So please come, let's take a group picture. There are anybody like to get involved, please do let us know. And we'd like to thank IEEE Baltimore section for co-sponsoring this event, and again, Princeton section, ACM. All right, so with that, we are wrapping up the 4th seminar. Please do have look out for the link for ACM YouTube. It'll be available within a week. And I'd like to thank everybody for joining. If some of your colleagues couldn't join, when the recording is available, please send it to them. Thanks again.